There are truths that can destroy a life in an instant. Elena discovered this on a Saturday afternoon, when her hands trembled as she held the small metal box that would change everything. But at that moment, while she was organizing her husband's garage, she had no idea that her next actions would shatter the illusion of 30 years of a perfect marriage. The sound of the broom sweeping across the concrete floor echoed through the garage as she tidied up the scattered tools. It was a Saturday like any other, or so she thought, determined to finally clean up the mess her husband Michael kept putting off. 3 decades of marriage had taught her that some things simply wouldn't change. His habit of procrastinating on household chores was one of them. The midday light filtered through the small garage windows, casting long shadows between the metal shelves. Elena wiped her forehead, brushing away a lock of gray hair that stubbornly fell over her eyes. Her fingers left a dust mark on her skin, making her smile. Michael always said she looked beautiful even when covered in grease, one of the many small gestures of affection that had kept their relationship alive after all these years. The tools seemed to tell stories. Each worn-out screwdriver, each pair of pliers marked by use carried memories of the countless projects her husband had undertaken over the years. Michael was a mechanic by trade, but it was in their home garage that his true creative spirit came alive. "This is my sanctuary," he would say, "where I can be myself without worries." Elena methodically organized each item, creating specific sections for different types of tools. She separated screws by size into small glass jars, arranged the wrenches by order of size, and gathered all the technical manuals into one pile. The work was tedious, but there was something comforting about bringing order to the chaos. It was then that her hands found what they shouldn't have. Hidden behind a pile of old technical magazines, the small metal box seemed out of place among the heavy-duty tools. It looked like something you would buy at a stationery store, one of those used to store important documents. There was nothing special about its appearance, but the fact that it was carefully concealed made her heart race with a dark premonition. Elena hesitated. In 3 decades of marriage, she had never violated Michael's privacy. Trust was the foundation of their relationship, and rummaging through his personal belongings felt like a betrayal of that principle. But something about the way the box was hidden, as if it contained a secret begging to be discovered, made her fingers move of their own accord. Her heart pounding, she opened the lid. The first thing she saw was a set of medical exams. Her world shattered as her eyes locked on the bold words printed at the top. Diagnosis: advanced hepatocellular carcinoma. The date of the exam was 3 months ago. Time seemed to freeze. Elena collapsed onto the workbench, her legs giving way under the weight of the discovery. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as she flipped through the documents, each page revealing more details about Michael's condition. There were reports from various specialists, blood test results, CT scans, and, what made her stomach churn, a devastating prognosis. Without treatment, 6 months to a year to live. Beneath the exams she found a journal. Michael's familiar handwriting filled pages and pages, dated since the initial diagnosis. Elena began to read, each word like a knife to her heart. "I don't know how to tell Elena. How do I tell the woman who shared her life with me for 30 years that I won't be here to complete 31? Every morning when I wake up beside her and see her smile, the words die in my throat. Maybe it's cowardice, but I'd rather see her happy in her ignorance than see her suffering with the truth." Tears blurred her vision. Elena tried to breathe deeply, but the air seemed to have been sucked out of the garage. The last few hours spent organizing the place now felt like they belonged to another life, one where her biggest problem was the mess left by her husband. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made her jump. Michael was home from work, or from what he said was work. How many of those outings had actually been medical appointments? How many times had he lied, smiled, and pretended everything was fine, silently carrying the weight of that death sentence alone? Elena quickly wiped away her tears, but she didn't put the documents away. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Through the garage window, she saw Michael getting out of the car, his tired walk now revealing much more than simple fatigue. How had she not noticed the signs before? The weight loss he attributed to a new diet, the paleness he blamed on overwork, the moments of weakness he said were just stress. The garage door began to open, and Elena stood frozen, the papers still in her trembling hands. Michael entered, his usual smile freezing as he saw the scene before him. His eyes went from his wife to the documents and then back to her. For a moment, the silence was deafening. "Elena," he began, his voice cracking. "Why?" she asked, surprised at the coldness in her own voice. "Why did you choose to face this alone?" The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Michael closed the door behind him, His shoulders slumped as if he could finally let go of the mask he had been wearing for months. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't want to make you suffer." Elena felt something break inside her. Not just her heart, but the entire foundation of trust they had built over 3 decades. The man before her, her life partner, her best friend, had chosen to face what could be his final battle alone. This discovery was not just about a terminal illness, it was about trust, choices, the true meaning of sharing a life. And now, sitting in that garage that had always been Michael's sanctuary, Elena realized that her own journey was just beginning. A journey that would test the limits of love, forgiveness, and the human capacity to face mortality. The afternoon sun continued to pour through the garage windows, indifferent to the drama unfolding inside. And as Elena and Michael stared at each other in silence, time, that precious thing they now knew to be so limited, seemed suspended, waiting to see how this couple would face the greatest challenge of their lives. The silence in the garage was broken only by the distant hum of the ceiling fan. Elena gripped the documents so tightly that her hands began to ache, while Michael remained standing by the door, like a statue whose weight of the world had just crashed down onto his shoulders. "I didn't want to make you suffer?" Elena repeated his words, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and pain. "And what do you think I'm feeling right now, Michael? What do you think it's like to accidentally find out that my husband is dying?" Michael took a hesitant step toward her, but Elena raised her hand, stopping him. She needed that space, that moment to process everything. The words of the diagnosis seemed to float before her eyes. Advanced hepatocellular carcinoma. Liver cancer. Terminal. "I was going to tell you," Michael began, his voice rough. "Every day I woke up thinking today would be the day that I'd find the right words." 3 months, Elena interrupted. "You had 3 months to find the right words. 3 months during which we continued living our lives as if nothing was wrong. 3 months of lies." Tears began to slide down Michael's face, something Elena hadn't seen since her parents died 15 years ago. He had always been the strong one, the pillar, the one who kept her steady in difficult times. Seeing him like this, vulnerable and broken, made something inside her twist. "Do you remember what you promised me on our wedding day?" Elena asked, her voice softer now. "You promised that we would face everything together, that there would be no secrets between us." Michael slowly approached her, and this time, Elena didn't stop him. He sat beside her on the workbench, the same bench where he had spent countless hours fixing broken things. Now, ironically, it was his life that needed fixing. "I started feeling the pain in January," he began, looking at his own hands. "I thought it was just fatigue, work stress. You know how busy the shop has been. But then I started losing weight, feeling a fatigue that wouldn't go away." Elena closed her eyes, recalling all the little changes she had noticed but chose to ignore. The shirts that started getting too loose, the nights she'd find him sitting in the living room at dawn, saying he just couldn't sleep. "When I got the diagnosis," Michael continued, his voice choking, "it felt like the world stopped. The doctor talked about treatment options, about quality of life, but all I could think about was you. How this would destroy you. So you decided to protect me by excluding me from your life?" Elena asked, a new wave of anger rising in her chest. "Denying me the right to be by your side when you needed it most?" "I was a coward," Michael admitted, running a tired hand over his face. "Every time I saw you smiling, making plans for the future, how could I destroy that? How could I be the one to take that spark from your eyes?" Elena flipped through the exams in her hands again, studying every detail she had only glimpsed in the initial shock. Her eyes paused on a specific date, an appointment scheduled for the following week. "Are you receiving any treatment?" Michael nodded slowly. "I started chemotherapy 2 weeks ago. That's why I've been leaving early some mornings. The doctor says that with the treatment I might have more time. Maybe even—" "How much time?" Elena interrupted, needing to hear the full truth now that the first secret had been revealed. "With the treatment, maybe 18 months. 2 years if we're very lucky." The number hit Elena like a punch to the stomach. 18 months. It wasn't enough time. Not for everything they still had to live together, for all the plans they had made. The retirement they had been planning, the trips they dreamed of taking, the grandchildren they hoped to one day meet. "Why didn't you seek help earlier? When you first started feeling the symptoms?" Michael let out a heavy sigh. "I think, deep down, I knew something was very wrong. But admitting it would mean facing the reality, and I wasn't ready. When I finally worked up the courage to get the tests, it was already too late." Elena stood up abruptly, unable to stay seated. She started pacing the garage, running her hands through her hair in a gesture of frustration. Every tool, every object in that space now seemed loaded with new meaning. How many more hours of life would her husband have to spend there, in his sanctuary? "You have a journal," she said suddenly, turning to face him. "Why could you write about it but not talk to me?" Michael lowered his eyes to the small notebook now resting on the workbench. "It was my way of coping with all of this. Of trying to organize my thoughts, of rehearsing the words I could never say out loud." "Let me see if I understand," Elena said, her voice trembling. "You managed to schedule appointments by yourself, do tests by yourself, start treatment by yourself, but you couldn't share any of that with your wife of 30 years? The sun was starting to set, casting orange shadows through the garage windows. Elena watched how the light played with the dust particles in the air, creating an ethereal spectacle that cruelly contrasted with the gravity of the moment. "What happens now?" Michael asked, his voice small and uncertain. Elena felt her heart tighten. In 3 decades of marriage she had never seen him so vulnerable, so lost. The strong, determined man she knew had been replaced by someone who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Now," she replied, taking a deep breath, "you're going to tell me everything. Every detail you've hidden, every appointment you made, every thought you wrote in that journal. And then we're going to face this together, whether you want to or not." Michael lifted his eyes, meeting hers. "I don't deserve you, Elena." "No, you don't," she agreed, feeling the tears return to her eyes. "But you're stuck with me, remember? In sickness and in health. And I've never broken my promises." In that moment, as the sun set over the garage that had witnessed so many moments of their lives, Elena and Michael were facing the beginning of a new journey. A journey that would test not only their love and strength but also their ability to forgive and accept that sometimes, the time we have with those we love is shorter than we'd like. The first night after the revelation was the longest night of Elena's life. Lying in the bed she had shared with Michael for 3 decades, she stared at the dark ceiling, unable to sleep. Beside her, Michael breathed heavily, finally worn out by hours of conversation and tears. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked relentlessly, each minute passing with torturous slowness. Elena studied the shadows dancing on the ceiling, cast by the occasional headlights of cars passing by on the street. Every movement from Michael beside her made her hold her breath. Now that she knew the truth, she could identify the small groans of pain he tried to stifle even in his sleep. How had she been so blind? Her mind kept replaying every moment from the past few months, searching for signs she should have noticed. The dinners when he barely touched his food, claiming he wasn't hungry. The mornings when she found him in the bathroom, pale and sweaty, saying he must have eaten something that didn't sit well. The afternoons when he napped on the couch, explaining that work at the shop had been more exhausting than usual. How could a wife not notice her husband was dying? The question haunted her, mingling with the guilt and anger still simmering in her chest. 30 years of marriage, and she hadn't been able to see past the mask of normalcy Michael had so carefully constructed. The alarm clock read 3:47 a.m. when Elena finally gave up trying to sleep. She quietly got up, her bare feet barely making a sound on the cold floor. Before leaving the room, she paused to look at Michael. In the dark, she could see how his face had thinned, how his cheeks were more hollow, how his eyebrows furrowed even in his sleep, likely in response to some pain he refused to share. She made her way to the office, carrying with her Michael's journal that she had found in the box. The small black notebook felt like lead in her hands. Inside were all the thoughts, fears, and secrets her husband had chosen to hide from her. Under the dim light of the lamp, she began to read, each word like a small stab to her heart. January 15th, today I had my first tests. The doctor tried to sound optimistic, but I saw something in his eyes that scared me. Elena noticed I've been quieter, but I told her it's just worry over the shop's bills. Another lie to add to the list. The worst part isn't lying, it's seeing how easily she believes me, how blindly she trusts my words. Each of her smiles is like a silent accusation of my cowardice. Elena closed her eyes, remembering that day. Michael had left early, saying he was just going in for a routine checkup, nothing serious. When he came back, he brought her flowers, something he hadn't done in years. At the time, the gesture made her happy. Now, she realized it was just another attempt of his to make up for his lies. She continued reading. February 2nd, the diagnosis came. Cancer. What a terrible word. 5 letters with the power to destroy a whole life. I spent the whole afternoon at the shop, pretending to work, but really I couldn't stop thinking about how to tell Elena. I started 3 different conversations with her today, but the words just wouldn't come out. How do you tell the person you love most in the world that you're going to leave her? How do you prepare someone for a loss that you can't even accept yourself? The following pages were a deep dive into her husband's tormented mind. Accounts of pain he hid, detailed descriptions of symptoms that worsened day by day, sleepless nights planning how to protect the family financially after he was gone. Between the lines, Elena could feel Michael's growing despair, his solitary battle against an invisible enemy that was consuming him from the inside out. February 27th, Elena caught me vomiting this morning. I said it was food poisoning. She suggested we see a doctor, but I managed to convince her that I was feeling better. The worry in her eyes almost made me tell her everything. But then she started talking about our retirement plans, about the trip we want to take to the coast next summer. How can I steal those dreams from her? How can I turn her smile into tears? Then she came across an entry that made her blood run cold. March 12th, today I discovered something that makes everything even harder. Dr. Thompson said there's an experimental treatment that could extend my life significantly, maybe even give me a chance at a cure. But the cost, all the money we've saved for our retirement wouldn't be enough. The house Elena loves so much, the shop I built from scratch, we'd have to sell everything. And even then there are no guarantees. How can I ask Elena to give up her dreams for a slim chance? How can I risk leaving her not only a widow but also without resources? I've decided not to tell her about this option. Some choices are too heavy to share. I'd rather leave knowing she'll have financial security than risk everything on a desperate gamble. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. Her hands trembled as she read that page over and over, making sure she had understood correctly. An experimental treatment. A chance at a cure. And Michael had once again decided, all on his own, that she didn't deserve to be part of that decision. The anger that had subsided during the reading of the journal returned with full force. Without a second thought, she turned on her computer and started searching for Dr. Thompson. His full name was on one of the prescriptions in the box. Dr. William Thompson, specialist in hepatic oncology. She found him quickly, a renowned oncologist known for his work with experimental therapies for advanced liver cancer cases. With trembling fingers, fueled by both rage and determination, Elena began a frantic search. The next hours blurred into a haze of medical articles, desperate emails, and as the day began to break, phone calls to Dr. Thompson's clinic. She discovered that the treatment mentioned in the journal was a new protocol combining immunotherapy with targeted therapy, which had shown promising results in cases similar to Michael's. Each new piece of information was like a punch to her stomach. The treatment was indeed expensive, astronomically expensive. But the preliminary results were impressive. Cases that had been considered terminal were showing significant remission. Lives that had been sentenced to death were gaining years of survival, some patients even reaching full recovery. The sun was already high when she heard Michael's footsteps in the hallway. He appeared at the door of the office, his eyes swollen with sleep and concern. "Elena? You've been here all night?" She slowly turned in her chair, holding the journal open to the page that had changed everything. "Why didn't you tell me about Dr. Thompson and the experimental treatment?" Michael visibly paled, his eyes fixed on the journal. "You shouldn't have read that. You shouldn't have read that?" Elena stood up, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you? How dare you hide a chance for survival from me?" "Elena, you don't understand," Michael started, but she interrupted him. "No, you don't understand." She slammed a pile of papers she had printed onto the table. "I spent the entire night researching. The treatment has a 47% success rate in cases like yours. Almost half of the patients showed significant remission. And it costs more than we have," Michael replied, his voice weary. "All our money, our savings, we'd have to sell the house, the workshop." "So what?" Elena shouted, tears streaming down her face. "What is a house compared to your life? What are retirement dreams if you're not here to share them?" "I can't leave you with nothing," Michael argued, his voice breaking. "If the treatment doesn't work, you'll be alone and without resources." Elena stepped closer to him, cradling his face in her hands. "Listen to me, Michael Thompson. I don't need a house, I don't need a comfortable retirement. I need you. And if there's even the smallest chance that we could have more time together, we're going to seize it with everything we have." "But Elena?" "No more secrets," she interrupted firmly. "No more unilateral decisions. I've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Thompson for tomorrow morning. We'll hear all the options together and then we'll make a decision. Together?" Michael stared at her for a long moment, his eyes brimming with a mix of fear and hope. "What if it doesn't work?" "Then we'll have tried," Elena answered, her voice softening. "And whatever the outcome, we'll face it the way we should have from the start. United?" The phone rang, making both of them jump. It was Dr. Thompson's clinic, confirming the appointment for the next day. As Elena answered, Michael picked up the journal and began flipping through it, his fingers stopping at the last blank page. "I think I need to make a new entry," he said softly when she hung up. "About how my stubborn wife refuses to give up on me even when I try." Elena smiled through her tears, taking his hand. "And I'll never give up. It's time to write a new chapter in this story, Michael. Together." The morning sun now bathed the office, casting an almost supernatural glow over the papers scattered across the table, pages and pages of research, medical articles, and hope. Elena knew that the road ahead would be the hardest they had ever faced, but for the first time since finding the box in the garage, she felt like they had a real chance to fight. And she was determined to fight with everything she had, even if it meant starting from scratch. Because some things were worth any sacrifice, and the 30 years of love they shared were definitely among them. The waiting room of Dr. Thompson's clinic was a study in pastel tones and soft lighting, clearly designed to calm the nerves of patients. For Elena, however, each minute there felt like a small eternity. Her fingers drummed restlessly on the armrest of the chair as she watched Michael fill out an endless stack of forms. The receptionist had raised an eyebrow when she saw the amount of research Elena had brought with her. An entire binder of medical articles, case studies, and statistics she had compiled during her sleepless night. Michael gave a faint smile as he watched his wife organize the papers for the 10th time. "You really researched all of this in one night?" he asked, his voice a whisper so as not to disturb the other patients in the room. Elena merely nodded, her eyes scanning the numbers she had already memorized. Success rate, 47%. Average survival, increased by 5.3 years in positive cases. Complete remission, 23% of patients after 2 years of treatment. Every statistic was a small seed of hope she refused to let die. "Mrs. Thompson?" The nurse's voice cut through her thoughts. "Dr. Thompson will see you now." The office was surprisingly cozy, with large windows that let in natural light and several family photographs on the walls. Dr. Thompson was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind thin-framed glasses. He stood to greet them, his handshake firm and warm. "Michael," he said with a smile of recognition before turning to Elena. "And you must be the wife. It's finally a pleasure to meet you." Elena felt a pang at hearing the word finally, another reminder of how long Michael had kept everything a secret. But she swallowed her bitterness and got straight to the point. "Doctor, I read about your combined immunotherapy experimental program. I want to know everything about it." The doctor seemed momentarily surprised by her assertiveness, but his face quickly softened into a knowing smile. "I see you've done your homework. Excellent. This will make our conversation easier." In the next 2 hours, Dr. Thompson explained the treatment in detail. It was a groundbreaking approach combining advanced immunotherapy with targeted drugs, designed to specifically attack the type of cancer Michael had. The preliminary results were promising, but the risks and side effects were not insignificant. "The treatment is intense," he explained, showing graphs and images on his computer. "The first months are particularly tough. Nausea, extreme fatigue, possible suppression of the immune system. But is there a real chance of a cure?" Elena interrupted, her eyes locked on the doctor's. "In some cases, yes," Dr. Thompson replied honestly. "But I need to be clear, there are no guarantees. And the cost?" "The cost isn't a problem," Elena stated firmly, even though she knew she was lying. They would have to sell practically everything they owned, but she wouldn't hesitate for a second. Michael, who had remained silent throughout most of the consultation, finally spoke up. "Doctor, could we have a moment alone?" As soon as the doctor left, Michael turned to Elena, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I can't let you do this." "This isn't your decision," Elena replied, her voice firm yet gentle. "Not anymore. Elena, you don't understand. The workshop, it's all I have to leave you. The house, it's been your home for 30 years. How can I ask you to give up everything for a chance that might lead to nothing?" Elena took her husband's hands in hers, noticing how cold and trembling they were. "Michael, look at me. Really look at me. What do you think is more important to me? A house? A workshop? Or more time with the man I love? But what if—" he began, his voice breaking. "What if it doesn't work?" Elena finished for him. "Then at least we will have fought. Together. Like we should have from the beginning." Michael lowered his head, and Elena saw a tear fall onto their joined hands. "I'm so scared, Elena. Not of dying, but of leaving you alone. Of leaving you with nothing. Do you want to know what I'm afraid of?" Elena asked, her voice soft. "I'm afraid that a year from now, or 2 or 5, I'll look back and think we could have tried something, but we didn't because you decided you knew what was best for me. I'm afraid of spending the rest of my life wondering, what if? She stood up and walked over to the office window looking out at the city. Life was going on as usual for all those people, oblivious to the drama unfolding in that room. You know what else I found out in my research last night? She continued, still staring out the window. I read about a couple in the same situation as ours. They sold everything they had for the treatment. The wife even went back to work after years of retirement. And do you know what happened? Michael shook his head even though Elena couldn't see him. The husband survived. He's been in remission for 3 years. They lost the house, lost their savings, had to start over from scratch. But they're together. And in the comments of the article, you know what the wife wrote? I would give everything again 1,000 times, just to have one more day with him. Elena turned to face Michael, silent tears streaming down her face. That's what you don't understand, my love. For me there is no choice here. There is no dilemma. If there's even the smallest chance of having more time with you, then no price is too high. Michael slowly stood up, his movements betraying the fatigue and pain he was trying to hide. He walked over to Elena and hugged her, and she felt how much weight he had lost in recent months, how his arms were weaker, how his body trembled slightly from the effort of standing. You've always been the strong one of us both, he murmured against her hair. It was always you who pushed me forward when I wanted to give up. And I always will be, Elena replied, her voice muffled against his chest. So, please let me be strong for us now too. When Dr. Thompson returned to the office a few minutes later, he found the couple still embraced by the window. Elena was the first to pull away, wiping the tears from her face with the back of her hand. We'll go through with the treatment, she declared, her voice leaving no room for doubt. The doctor nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. I'll have my secretary prepare all the paperwork. We'll need to start as soon as possible. While the doctor busied himself with the papers, Elena looked at Michael and saw something different in his eyes, a sparkle that had been missing in recent months. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a glimmer of hope. And for now that little spark was all they needed. The days following the consultation with Dr. Thompson passed like a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. Elena threw herself into the task of turning all their belongings into money with the same fierce determination she had shown throughout her life. Every call to brokers, every negotiation, every document signed felt like a small battle in her personal war against time. The house was the first to be put up for sale, priced considerably below market value to ensure a quick sale. Elena tried not to think too much as she packed 30 years of memories into cardboard boxes. Every picture on the walls, every growth mark of the nephews recorded on the kitchen door frame, every little scratch on the floor that told a story, all had to be left behind. In the first few nights after they put up the for sale sign in the yard, Elena would wake up startled, her subconscious still not adjusted to the idea that soon this wouldn't be their home anymore. She often found Michael standing in different rooms of the house, staring at the walls as if trying to memorize every detail. We can rent a small apartment near the clinic, she would say in those moments, trying to sound optimistic. Something temporary until you get better. Michael would just nod, but Elena could see the guilt in his eyes, the weight he carried seeing his wife having to give up everything they had built together. The workshop, however, was a different story. Since Michael had opened it 25 years ago, that place had been more than just a business. It was his sanctuary, his place of peace. Elena knew that selling it would be like tearing a piece of her husband's soul away. On the morning they were supposed to sign the papers for the sale of the workshop, Michael seemed especially downcast. Elena found him sitting at his workbench before dawn, running his fingers over the tools he had accumulated over decades. The place still smelled of oil and metal, scents that had always been synonymous with honest work and dedication for him. We can wait a little longer, she suggested softly, resting her hand on his shoulder, feeling how much weight he had lost even through the thick fabric of his shirt. Maybe find another buyer? Michael shook his head, his voice hoarse with restrained emotion. No, Dr. Thompson said we need to start the treatment as soon as possible. And Mr. Davidson made a fair offer. Elena watched her husband start putting away his tools for the last time, each movement loaded with memories. The hands that had fixed so many engines were now trembling slightly, whether from emotion or from the illness that was consuming him, she couldn't tell. It was then that she noticed something strange. Michael seemed to be sorting a few tools into a different box, his movements furtive, almost guilty. A behavior she knew all too well after 30 years of marriage. What are you doing? Just keeping a few mementos, he replied vaguely, continuing his task with a suspicious determination. Elena frowned, an alarm going off in her mind. There was something in his voice, something that didn't sound right. the same tone he had used when he tried to hide his illness. She approached the box and her heart froze when she saw its contents, not just old tools but the most valuable ones Michael owned. Special tools for delicate work, some imported, all worth a small fortune. "Michael," she said slowly, her heart racing with the realization of what this meant, "why are you hiding your best tools from the sale?" The silence that followed was deafening. Michael continued organizing the tools, avoiding her gaze like a boy caught in a mischief. But this wasn't a mischief, this was something far more serious. "They're not that important," he murmured, still not looking at her. "Mr. Davidson won't even notice they're missing?" Elena felt her stomach twist with sudden understanding. "You're planning to keep working?" It wasn't a question. Michael finally stopped what he was doing, his shoulders slumped in defeat, like a man carrying a weight too heavy to bear. "I need to do something, Elena. I can't just sit here while you sell everything we have. I can't just be a burden." "The treatment?" she began, but he interrupted her, his voice rising with desperation. "The treatment is going to leave me weak, I know. But in between, when I'm feeling better, I can do small jobs. I have old clients who trust me. I can work from home in whatever time I have. I just need to feel useful." "No?" The force in Elena's voice made him flinch. The word echoed through the empty workshop like a gunshot. "No, Michael. You're not doing this. You're not going to take that risk." "Elena?" Dr. Thompson explained the risks, she continued, her voice trembling with anger and fear. The doctor's words echoed in her mind with terrifying clarity. "Your immune system will be compromised. Any contamination, any cut or wound could become a serious infection. And you want to work with tools? With grease? With chemicals?" Michael finally turned to face her, and Elena saw in his eyes something that terrified her more than any physical symptom. Deep shame, mixed with a desperation that broke her heart. "I can't be dead weight," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't just sit here watching you carry everything on your own. You're selling our house, Elena. Our house. Because of me. How can I accept that without doing something to help?" "Dead weight?" Elena repeated, incredulous. Her anger was replaced by a deep pain. "Is that how you see yourself?" She stepped closer to him, cupping his face in her hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "Michael Thompson, you are the most stubborn and infuriating man I've ever known. For 30 years you've been my strength, my safe harbor. When I lost my parents, you were the one who kept me whole. When I had to quit my job to care for my sick sister, you worked double to keep our lives going. Now it's my turn to be your strength. And if you think I'll let you risk yourself like this, then you don't know me at all." She pulled away abruptly and started taking the tools from the box Michael had set aside, putting them back with the others for sale. Each piece she removed felt like a silent protest against her husband's stubbornness. "Elena, please," Michael tried to argue, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to feel useful. I can't just disappear from the lives of the people who trust me." "Useful?" She turned to him, tears of frustration in her eyes. "You want to be useful? Then fight. Fight with every ounce of strength you have against this disease. Put every bit of energy you've got into getting better. That's your job now, surviving. And if you think continuing to work secretly is more important than that, then maybe I've been wrong about you all these years." Michael collapsed onto the workbench, suddenly looking much older and more tired. The weight of all the lies, all the secrets, seemed to have finally become too heavy to carry. "What if I can't?" he asked, his voice breaking. "What if, after we sell everything, after you sacrifice everything? What if I die anyway? What if you're left with nothing, Elena? No home, no savings, no me?" Elena felt her legs weaken. She sat beside him on the bench, taking his hands in hers. The same hands that had built so many things, fixed so many problems, now trembling under the weight of fear. "Then you will have fought," she answered softly. "You will have given me the chance to fight by your side. And that means more to me than any house, any workshop, any financial security." She took a deep breath, gathering the courage for what she needed to say next. The words to come might be harsh, but they were necessary. "But if you try to kill yourself working in secret, if you risk your health like that I won't forgive. Because that will be like giving up, Michael. It will be like saying that all our effort, all our sacrifice isn't worth it." The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the ticking of the old clock on the workshop wall. It was the same clock Michael had fixed on his first day of work in the shop, a piece that marked not just the hours, but also the memories of a lifetime dedicated to that place. Elena watched the emotions pass across her husband's face like clouds on a stormy day, wounded pride, fear, shame, and finally reluctant acceptance. It was like watching a warrior lay down his weapons, acknowledging that some battles cannot be won in the traditional way. Slowly, Michael took the last tool he had set aside, a rusty wrench his father had given him when he opened the workshop. It was more than a tool, it was a symbol of his heritage, of everything he had built and now needed to leave behind. With trembling hands, he placed it alongside the others to be sold. "You're right," he said simply, his voice heavy with contained emotion. As always, Elena smiled through her tears, leaning in to kiss his forehead. In that kiss was all the love accumulated over 3 decades, all the fear of the uncertain future, all the strength they would need to face the days to come. "Not always," she replied softly. "But this time, yes. Now let's go. We have papers to sign and a new battle to begin." As they organized the last few things, Elena noticed Michael stopping at different spots in the workshop, as if silently saying goodbye to each corner. By the door, he paused in front of the wall where dozens of photos were hung, satisfied customers standing beside their repaired cars, workshop birthday celebrations, moments captured over the years that told the story of a life dedicated to honest work. "We can take the photos," Elena suggested gently. Michael shook his head. "No. They belong to this place. They're part of the shop's history, not just mine." Elena understood. Some things needed to remain intact, like a testament to what had been built there. The photos would serve as reminders for the future owners of the space, showing that those walls held more than just tools and machines. They held stories, dreams, and the legacy of a man who had dedicated his life to helping others. As they left the workshop for the last time, Elena glanced back at the space that had been Michael's sanctuary for so many years. The tools, now organized for sale, gleamed under the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows, like soldiers preparing for one last mission. Mr. Davidson would arrive in an hour to finalize the purchase. Soon, other hands would wield those tools, other dreams would be built within those walls. Life would move forward as it always does. But the real battle, Elena knew, was just beginning. The treatment would be long and difficult. The days would be filled with uncertainty and fear. There would be moments of despair, of doubt, of wanting to give up. However, now they would face it all together with all the weapons that truly mattered: love, courage, and the fierce determination not to give up on each other. Because in the end, Elena understood, it's not the material possessions that define a life, but the battles we choose to fight and the people we choose to fight for. Closing the workshop door one last time, Elena squeezed Michael's hand in hers. The future was uncertain, but one thing she was sure of: as long as they were together, there would always be hope. The first 3 months of treatment were the hardest. The small apartment they had rented near the clinic became a fortress against the outside world, a place where every battle against the disease was fought in silence. Elena watched helplessly as the experimental treatment transformed her strong and determined husband into a shadow of the man he used to be. The immunotherapy sessions left Michael exhausted, his skin taking on a yellowish tint that made Elena's heart tighten. Entire nights were spent in the bathroom, where he bent over the toilet while she held his forehead, whispering words of encouragement that seemed to grow emptier with each passing day. "It will pass," she repeated like a mantra, even when her own voice trembled with uncertainty. "You're stronger than this." On one particularly difficult morning, after a night of high fever and intense pain, Elena found Michael sitting on the small balcony of the apartment, watching the sunrise with tired, hollow eyes. "Maybe we should stop," he said softly without looking at her. "The treatment, it's consuming all our money and I just seem to get worse." Elena felt her heart freeze. "No," she replied firmly. "Don't even think about it." "Elena," he started, but was interrupted by a violent coughing fit that left him breathless. She rushed into the apartment, returning with water and the medications that had now become part of their daily routine. As she helped him take the pills, she noticed how his hands trembled, how every movement seemed to cost him energy he no longer had. "Dr. Thompson said this could happen," she reminded him, trying to keep her voice steady. "The first few months are the hardest. The treatment has to weaken your immune system before it kills me?" Michael bitterly finished. The harshness in his voice made Elena pull back as if she had been slapped. It was the first time he had so openly voiced his fear of death, and the rawness of those words hit her like a cold wave. "Don't talk like that," she whispered. "Why not? It's the truth, isn't it? We spent all our savings, sold everything we had, and for what? So I can die in a rented apartment, leaving you with nothing?" Elena felt the anger rising in her chest, an anger born from fear and love. "Enough," her voice came out louder than she intended. "You don't have the right to give up like this. You don't have the right to make our sacrifice meaningless. Michael tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Elena caught him before he fell, and for a moment they stood there, holding each other, their breaths synchronized in a rhythm of shared pain. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "I'm so tired, Elena. So tired of fighting." She held him tighter, feeling every bone of his emaciated body, every tremor of his weakened muscles. "I know, my love. I know. But we're not at the end of the battle yet. Dr. Thompson said we need to give the treatment time." As if summoned by her words, the phone rang inside the apartment. It was Dr. Thompson's clinic, moving up the follow-up appointment to that afternoon. Something in the secretary's voice made Elena feel a chill run down her spine. Hours later, sitting in the now familiar consultation room, Elena held Michael's hand as Dr. Thompson reviewed the latest test results. The silence in the room was heavy, charged with expectation. "The results aren't what we hoped for," the doctor began, his professional tone barely masking the concern in his eyes. Elena felt Michael's hand tighten around hers. "What does this mean?" she asked, even though she feared the answer. "The tumor isn't responding to the treatment as we'd like. In fact," the doctor hesitated, adjusting his glasses in a nervous gesture. "The tests show that it's grown in the last 2 months." The world seemed to stop. Elena felt as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. Beside her, Michael remained strangely quiet. But there has to be something we can do," she protested, her voice trembling. "Other treatments, other options?" "There is one possibility," Dr. Thompson replied slowly. "A new protocol that's being tested in cases like Michael's. It's even more experimental than the current one, and the risks are considerably higher." "What kind of risks?" Michael asked, his voice surprisingly steady. "The treatment is much more aggressive. There's a significant risk of organ failure, and the mortality rate during the procedure is high." "And the chances of success?" Elena barely recognized her own voice. 30%, the doctor replied. "But I need to be honest. If it works, it might not only stop the tumor's growth, but potentially reverse it." Elena felt her heart race. 30%. It was less than the current treatment, but it was still a chance. She turned to Michael, ready to argue, to fight, to convince him. But what she saw in his eyes made her stop. It wasn't fear nor resignation. It was a determination she hadn't seen in months. "How much does it cost?" Michael asked. Dr. Thompson mentioned a figure that made Elena feel dizzy. It was more than they had spent so far, more than they could ever gather by selling the little they had left. She started, but Michael interrupted her. "We'll do it. Michael, we can't afford this." "My mother's apartment," he said, turning to her. "The one she left to me when she passed. I never wanted to sell it because it was the last memory of her, but—" "No," Elena protested. "It's your inheritance, the last thing she—" "It's my choice," Michael gently interrupted. "You sold everything for me, Elena. You left our home, gave up all your dreams. Now it's my turn to give something up." He turned to Dr. Thompson, and for the first time in months, Elena saw a spark of the old Michael in his eyes. "How much time do we have to decide?" "As soon as possible would be ideal," the doctor replied. "But I need you to understand. This treatment is extremely risky. You need to be absolutely certain." Michael squeezed Elena's hand, and she felt something different in his touch. It wasn't the weak grip of the last few months, but something firmer, more determined. "Doctor," he said, a small smile forming on his lips, "I'm already dying. The only difference now is that I'm going to fight with everything I have." That night, back in the small apartment, Elena watched Michael sleep. His rest was restless, disturbed by the side effects of the current treatment, but there was something different in his expression. A serenity she hadn't seen in a long time. Sitting in the armchair beside the bed, Elena flipped through Michael's journal, now filled with new entries since they started the treatment. One page in particular caught her attention. "Today I saw Elena crying in the bathroom. She thought I wouldn't notice, that the sound of the shower would drown out her sobs. She's so strong in front of me, so determined, but I know inside she's just as scared as I am. How can I let her carry this weight alone? How can I just give up when she refuses to give up on me?" Tears blurred her vision. Elena closed the journal and moved closer to the bed, gazing at her husband's face. Michael had lost so much weight that his features seemed chiseled from stone, but he was still the same man she had fallen in love with 3 decades ago. The process of selling the Thompson family apartment was surprisingly quick. It was a well-located property, and the realtor found a buyer in just 2 weeks. When Elena went to clean the place for the last time, she found Michael standing in the middle of the empty room, holding an old photograph. "My mother loved this place," he said softly. "She used to say this was where she kept all the happy memories with my dad." Elena approached, looking at the photo over his shoulder. It showed Michael's parents young and smiling, standing in front of the building. It was like looking through a portal into the past, to a simpler, happier time. "She would understand," Elena replied, hugging him from behind. "Your mother always said there's no price too high when it comes to saving someone we love." Michael nodded, tucking the photo into his pocket. "I'll just take this one. The rest can stay for the new family to make their own memories." The new treatment began on a cold autumn Monday. Dr. Thompson had explained every detail of the procedure, every risk, every possible complication. It was such an experimental protocol that Michael had to sign dozens of consent forms. "The first cycle is the most critical," the doctor explained as he prepared the equipment. "The next 72 hours will determine if your body will accept the treatment." Elena held Michael's hand as the first doses of medication began to flow through his veins. The liquid was a deep red, almost metallic, and seemed to glow under the hospital's fluorescent lights. The first hours were calm until they weren't. In the early hours of the second day, Michael began having violent seizures. The alarms from the monitors blared, and the room was flooded with a medical team. Elena was pushed out, and all she could do was watch through the glass as they fought to stabilize him. "His body is reacting to the treatment," Dr. Thompson explained later, his lab coat stained with sweat. "It's a more intense response than we expected, but it could also be a good sign. It means it's working." Elena nodded mechanically, her eyes fixed on Michael's unconscious form in the bed. Tubes and wires connected him to several machines, each one monitoring a different aspect of his fight for survival. The hours dragged on like decades. Elena refused to leave the hospital, sleeping in a hard chair beside Michael's bed. She watched every rise and fall of his breath, every small change in the monitors, desperately searching for signs of improvement. It was at the end of the third day that everything changed. Michael had just undergone another round of tests when Dr. Thompson entered the room with an expression that Elena couldn't quite decipher. Her heart stopped for a moment, bracing for the worst. "The preliminary results," the doctor began, his voice trembling slightly. "The tumor, it's responded to the treatment. For the first time since we started, we're seeing signs of regression." Elena felt her legs weaken. Michael, still too weak to speak, squeezed her hand with a strength she hadn't felt in months. "What does this mean?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means we have a real chance," Dr. Thompson replied, a tired smile forming on his face. "A real chance to win this battle." Elena bent over Michael's bed, tears of relief and hope streaming down her face. He raised his trembling hand to touch her face, and in that moment they both knew, it had all been worth it. Every sacrifice, every moment of pain, every difficult decision, everything had led to this moment. "It's not over yet," the doctor gently cautioned. "The road ahead is still long and difficult. But now we have hope." Michael smiled faintly and in a hoarse voice, whispered the words Elena would never forget. "Now I can really fight. For you. For us. For all the sacrifice we've made." Elena kissed his forehead softly, feeling for the first time in months that the future wasn't just a dark shadow, but a horizon that was starting to clear. The following weeks were a roller coaster of emotions. Each new test brought a mix of hope and fear. The tumor continued responding to the treatment, but Michael's body struggled to endure the aggression of the medication. There were days of victory, when the results showed an even greater reduction in the tumor. In those moments, Elena saw the sparkle return to Michael's eyes, saw the strength slowly returning to his body, ravaged by the disease. But there were also days of defeat, when the fever consumed him and his body trembled uncontrollably. Nights when Elena held his hand while he deliriously called out for his late mother, murmuring apologies for all the times he had tried to face everything alone. "You were right," he said one night during a moment of clarity. "About fighting together. About not giving up." Elena, who had been changing the sweat-soaked sheets, stopped to look at him. "I'm always right," she joked, trying to keep the tone light despite the exhaustion she felt down to her bones. "No," Michael insisted, his voice weak but determined. "It's more than that. When I found out about the disease, I thought I was protecting you by hiding everything. But in truth, I was scared." "Scared of what?" Elena asked softly, sitting at the edge of the bed. "Scared of seeing you suffer. Of seeing the pain in your eyes. But mostly." He paused, breathing heavily, "Scared that if you knew the truth, you'd only see a sick man in me, not the strong husband I used to be." Elena felt the tears sting her eyes. "Oh Michael. But you You showed me something different. You showed me that true love isn't about being strong all the time. It's about letting the other person be strong for you when you can't be anymore." A nurse entered to check Michael's vital signs, momentarily interrupting the conversation. Elena watched as she adjusted his medication and made notes on her clipboard. When they were alone again, Michael continued, "You know what gives me the most strength to fight?" Michael said, his voice weak but steady. "It's not the fear of dying. It's knowing that every day I survive is a victory for both of us, not just for me." Elena held his hand, feeling the heat from his fever. "And we're going to have many more victories, my love." "Many?" Dr. Thompson entered the room at that moment, carrying a folder with the latest test results. His face was serious, but there was a glimmer in his eyes that made Elena's heart race. "I have news," he announced, pulling up a chair to sit next to the bed. "The latest tests show a significant reduction in the tumor. More than that, the cancer cells seem to be responding better than expected to the treatment." Elena held her breath, gripping Michael's hand tighter. "What exactly does this mean, doctor?" Michael asked, his voice betraying the exhaustion he was feeling. "It means that, for the first time since we began this journey, I can say with some certainty, you made the right choice. The treatment is working better than any of us dared to hope." Elena felt tears run down her face, but this time they were tears of joy, relief, and renewed hope. "We still have a long road ahead," the doctor continued, his professional tone barely hiding his own emotion. "The treatment needs to continue and the coming months won't be easy. But now we can truly talk about the possibility of a cure." Michael closed his eyes, and Elena saw tears rolling down his thin face. It was the first time she had seen him cry since the nightmare had begun. "Thank you," he whispered, and Elena knew he wasn't just speaking to the doctor. That night, after Michael finally fell asleep, Elena stayed awake, watching the moon through the hospital window. She thought about all they had lost: the house, the workshop, the savings of a lifetime. But she also thought about what they had gained: a new understanding of love, a strength they hadn't known they had, and now, finally, a real chance for the future. In her purse, Michael's old journal held blank pages, waiting to be filled with new stories, new moments, new hopes. And for the first time in a long while, Elena knew they would have the chance to write those stories together. A year later, Elena was sitting on the small balcony of the rented apartment, watching the sun rise while holding a steaming cup of coffee. The fresh morning air carried the scent of flowers from the building's community garden, a small project she had started during the waiting hours between Michael's treatment sessions. Inside the apartment, she could hear the familiar sounds of her husband moving around in the kitchen. The smell of toast and eggs mixed with the coffee, creating that homely atmosphere she had missed so much during the long months at the hospital. The last year had been a journey of ups and downs, of small victories and great challenges. But now, looking back, Elena knew that every moment had been worth it. Michael appeared on the balcony, carrying his own coffee, his movements still a little slower than before, but steady. His face had regained its color, and though he was still thinner than before the illness, he was no longer the shadow he had been during treatment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting next to her. Elena smiled, watching how the rising sun played with the gray strands of hair that had multiplied in his hair over the past year. "I was thinking about how things change," she replied. "How life can turn upside down in an instant." Michael nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Sometimes for the better?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "Better?" "Yes," he affirmed with conviction. "Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the illness was a blessing in disguise or some nonsense like that. But it taught us something, don't you think?" Elena paused for a moment, remembering the toolbox in the garage, the hidden journal, the lies told with the best of intentions. "It taught us about honesty," she said finally. "About trusting each other enough to share not just the joys but also the fears. And about strength," Michael added. "Not the strength that comes from trying to carry everything alone, but the strength that comes from admitting we need each other." Elena reached out with her free hand to hold his, feeling the familiar texture of the calluses that, even after a year away from the workshop, still marked his skin. "Dr. Thompson called yesterday," she said casually, though her heart raced as she remembered the conversation. Michael turned to look at her, expectation in his eyes. "And?" "The latest tests are still clear. 6 months in a row with no sign of the tumor." Michael closed his eyes, letting out a deep sigh. 6 months was a significant milestone, not an absolute guarantee, but a real hope that the nightmare had finally ended. "You know what that means?" he asked, a smile forming on his lips. "That we can start thinking about the future again? That we can start building a new future," he corrected gently. "Not going back to what we were, but creating something new from what we've learned." Elena thought about the changes the last year had brought. The house and the workshop sold, a lifetime savings spent on treatment. To many it would seem like they had lost everything. But sitting there, holding the hand of the man she had almost lost, Elena knew they had gained something far more valuable. "I received an interesting offer yesterday," Michael commented after a moment of comfortable silence. "The local technical school is looking for an instructor for the mechanics course. Someone with practical experience to teach the young ones." Elena smiled, remembering how many times she had seen Michael patiently explaining to clients the problems with their cars, always concerned with educating, not just fixing. "You'd be a wonderful teacher." "It would be different from the workshop," he admitted. "Less physically demanding, more time to take care of myself." And he hesitated, a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "The starting salary is better than we expected." Elena understood what he wasn't saying. It was a chance to start over, to build a new life that respected his current limitations but still allowed him to do what he loved, working with cars and helping people. "And what about you?" Michael asked. "Still thinking about going back to school?" Elena nodded. During the long hours in the hospital, she had rediscovered her love for reading, filling the time between treatment sessions with books on a variety of subjects. "The local university has a night program in psychology," she replied. "After this last year, I think I have a lot to offer people going through tough times." Michael squeezed her hand. "You've always known exactly what to say to keep me strong. Other people would be lucky to have you by their side." The sun was now completely above the horizon, bathing the balcony in a golden light that seemed like an omen of better days to come. "Do you know what's funny?" Elena commented, watching a pair of birds building a nest in a nearby tree. "When I found that box in the garage, I thought it was the end of everything. But in reality, it was a new beginning," Michael finished. Elena nodded, leaning back in her chair and letting the sun warm her face. The future was still uncertain in many ways, but now that uncertainty brought no fear, only possibilities. They no longer had the house of their dreams, nor the workshop that had been Michael's pride for so many years. But they had something far more precious, each other, and the deep understanding that life's true treasures cannot be measured in material things. "I think it's time to start a new journal," Michael said softly. "One we can write together this time." Elena smiled, thinking of all the blank pages ahead of them, ready to be filled with new stories, new dreams, new adventures. "Together," she agreed. "Always together." And there, on that small porch bathed in the morning light, Elena knew they had found something no illness could take from them. The certainty that true love is not found in grand gestures or big promises, but in the courage to face each day side by side, in the honesty of sharing both the joys and the pains, and in the strength that comes from knowing that, no matter what life brings, some people simply belong to each other. Hey everyone! If this story touched your heart as much as it touched ours, don't forget to leave a comment telling us what you thought. And if you want more intense and emotional stories like this one, give that like button a click and subscribe to the Life Stories channel. Your support helps us continue bringing these amazing stories to you. Until the next one.